came back from my brother's funeral in Thunder Bay with my hand still shaking on the steering wheel of that old Buick I'd been driving for 19 years. The drive back to Mississauga took me close to 17 hours, and I did most of it in one stretch, stopping only for gas and a bad coffee somewhere outside Wawa. My chest felt hollow the whole way. Edmund had been my only sibling, 4 years younger than me, and we'd grown up sharing a bunk bed in a tiny clapboard house off Algoma Street. Now he was in the ground, and I was the last one left from our family. Before I tell you what I overheard the moment I walked into my own son's house, do me a small kindness. If you've ever had family treat you like an inconvenience, like a coat they couldn't quite figure out where to hang, hit that subscribe button, just so I know there are still people out there who understand what it means to give everything to your blood and get treated like a stranger in return. Now let me get to it, because what I heard through that kitchen door turned my blood to ice water and changed every single thing about how I plan to spend whatever years I have left. My name is Calvin. I'm 68. I worked 37 years for Stelco in Hamilton before they restructured me out the door with a pension that barely covers my prescriptions. My wife, Marlene, passed 9 years ago this October. Ovarian cancer, fast and ugly. And after she went, I sold our little bungalow in Stony Creek because I couldn't stand walking past her sewing room every morning. My son Hugh was the one who suggested I move in with him and his wife. He said, "Dad, you shouldn't be rattling around alone. We've got that finished basement. Come live with us, save your money, be near the grandkids." And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. That was 7 years ago. The grandkids he mentioned, my granddaughters Briar and Cassidy, they were 11 and 9 when I moved in. Now they're young women, 18 and 16, and they barely look at me when I pass them in the hallway. The basement Hugh promised turned into the laundry room a year after I arrived. He moved me up to what he called the den, which was really a converted sunroom off the back of the house, single-pane windows, no proper insulation, and a space heater that tripped the breaker every time the dishwasher ran. In winter, I could see my breath when I woke up. I never complained. Marlene used to say, "Calvin, you absorb things too much. You let people walk on you because you don't want to make a fuss." She wasn't wrong. So when Edmund's lawyer called me 3 weeks ago and told me my brother had named me the sole beneficiary of his estate, I didn't tell anyone. Not Hugh, not his wife Pamela, not even my old friend Stuart, who I have coffee with on Wednesdays at the Tim Hortons on Hurontario. Edmund had done well for himself. He'd started a small trucking outfit in the early 90s hauling pulpwood, and somehow turned it into a freight logistics company that ran routes from Thunder Bay clear across the prairies into BC. He never married, no children, lived simple, drove a beat-up Silverado, and ate at the same diner every morning. But he'd been quietly building something the whole time. The lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Tremblay, sat me down in her office on Cumberland Street and slid a folder across the desk. 3 properties in northwestern Ontario, she said. 2 of them are working operations. One's a 48-acre dairy farm outside Dryden that Edmund bought from a friend who was retiring, and the second is a cattle ranch up by Atikokan that runs to nearly 200 acres. The third is a house on Lake Superior, a real beauty by all accounts. Log construction, 2 stories, sitting on a private cove just east of Schreiber. And then she paused, took off her reading glasses, and told me that after taxes and the sale of the company, my brother had left me 22 million Canadian dollars in liquid assets, sitting in a holding account at RBC. I had to ask her to repeat the number. She did, and then she repeated it a 3rd time, because I think she could see I'd gone somewhere else inside my own head. Edmund had never let on, not at Christmas dinners, not on the phone, not when I'd wired him $800 3 years ago because I thought he was struggling after a bad winter. He'd taken the money. He'd thanked me. And the whole time he'd been worth more than I could have earned in 20 lifetimes at Stelco. I drove back from Thunder Bay with that knowledge sitting in my chest like a hot coal. I didn't know what I was going to do with any of it. I'm a careful man. I'm not flashy. I don't need much. My plan, such as it was, came together in pieces during that long drive south. I tell Hugh and Pamela I'd inherited a few small pieces of property from Edmund, just the farms, nothing big, and I'd let them believe I was going to sign things over to Hugh eventually because that's what fathers do. I'd live the same quiet life, maybe fix up the house on Lake Superior over time, and have it as a getaway. Maybe send the granddaughters to whatever university they wanted. I'd be useful again. I'd be the patriarch I'd always wanted to be. That was my plan when I pulled into the driveway on Edenbrook Drive at almost 11 o'clock at night. Hugh's truck was in the driveway, Pamela's Lexus next to it, lights on in the kitchen. I came in through the side door because I always come in through the side door, took my boots off on the mat, hung my coat on the peg, and I was about to call out that I was home when I heard Pamela's voice through the swinging door that separates the mudroom from the kitchen. Pamela was saying, "We can't keep doing this, Hugh. He's been here 7 years. 7 years I've been patient. I've been a saint about it." And Hugh, my own son, his voice low and tired, said, I know. I stood there in my socks with my coat halfway off the peg and I didn't move. I didn't even breathe properly. Pamela kept going. She said, "He just got back from his brother's funeral." The brother had nothing, Hugh. Nothing. So now, Calvin's even more useless than before. There's no inheritance coming. There's no farm in the Maritimes he's been promising the girls. There's nothing. He's just an old man eating our food and using our hot water and getting older and more confused every month. He's not confused, Hugh said. He forgets things, Pamela said. He left the stove on twice last month. He puts the milk in the cupboard. I'm telling you, it's starting. And I will not, become a full-time caregiver to your father in this house. We have a plan, Hugh. We talked about this. Maplewood Glen takes residents starting at 65. They have a wing for early-stage memory care, and his pension and his old-age security will cover most of it. We just need him to sign the power of attorney before he gets any worse. Because once it's medical, it gets complicated. There was a long silence. Then Hugh said, he doesn't have anything for the girls' tuition. I was kind of hoping the brother. I know, Pamela cut him off. I was hoping too. But it didn't pan out, did it? So we moved to Plan B. He goes to Maplewood Glen. We convert the sunroom into the office I've been wanting for 3 years, and we list this place in the spring like we talked about. The new build in Oakville closes in October. We need him out of the picture by then. Cleanly. With paperwork that holds up. I'm not putting my dad in a home, Pamela. You are, she said. You absolutely are. Because the alternative is that he lives with us until he dies and we lose 10 years of our lives wiping his backside. I love you, Hugh, but I did not sign up for that. I made my position clear when he moved in. 7 years was the upper limit. We're past it. I want to tell you that I burst through that door. I want to tell you that I shouted, that I confronted them, that I picked up a chair and threw it through the bay window. But I didn't. I stood there in my wool socks with my hand frozen on the coat peg, and I let them keep talking because some part of my brain, the part that had spent 37 years walking a steel mill floor watching where the ladle swung, that part knew to stay quiet and gather information. Pamela said, and the medical thing, that's our friend. He's been forgetful. We document it. We get Dr. Whelan to write a letter. It doesn't have to be a full diagnosis, just enough to support the POA. Then, we move him to Maplewood Glen. We list this house, we close on Oakville, and we're free. The girls go to whatever school they want. We travel. We have our life back. Hugh, we are 46 years old. We have maybe 20 good years left. I am not spending them changing your father's bedsheets. Hugh said, I hear you. I do. I just need a minute. Take a minute, she said. But by the end of the month, we need to have started the paperwork. The longer we wait, the more it looks like elder abuse if anyone goes digging. Right now, we have a runway. After the new year, we don't. I backed up. I put my coat back on. I picked up my boots and I carried them out the side door, and I walked to the end of the driveway in my socks before I sat down on the curb and put them on, with shaking hands. Then I got in the Buick, and I drove. I drove to a Comfort Inn off the 401, and I checked in under my own name, and I sat on the edge of that polyester bedspread for the better part of 3 hours. Not crying, not sleeping, just looking at the wall. By morning, I had a different man's plan in my head. I called Mrs. Tremblay first thing. I told her I needed to come back to Thunder Bay for a few days, that I had decisions to make, and I'd rather make them in her office than over the phone. She said, "Come whenever I needed." I called Hugh from the hotel and I told him my old friend Wendell had taken a bad turn, and I was driving up to see him before it was too late. Might be gone a week. Hugh said, "Take care of yourself, Dad. Drive safe." He said it the way you say things to a house guest you're hoping will leave. I could hear it now. I could hear everything now. I drove north. I drove for 2 days. I stopped in Sudbury, then in Wawa again, and I thought about Marlene the whole way. I thought about how she'd raised Hugh, how she'd packed his lunch every day until he was 16, how she'd cried when he got accepted to McMaster, how she'd loved Pamela like a daughter when Hugh first brought her home from a Christmas party at the brokerage where they both worked. Marlene had told me once, near the end, that Pamela had a coldness in her she couldn't quite place. I'd brushed it off. I'd said Pamela was just an ambitious woman in a man's industry. She had to be tough. Marlene had given me that look she had, the one that meant she'd already finished an argument I hadn't started yet. And she'd said, "Calvin, women know other women. I'm telling you what I see." I'd kissed her forehead and told her not to worry. Now my wife was 9 years dead, and my daughter-in-law was planning to warehouse me in a memory care unit so she could turn my drafty sunroom into a home office. When I got to Mrs. Tremblay's office, I sat down and I told her everything. Word for word, what I'd heard. She listened without interrupting. Then she got up and closed the door even though we were already alone. And she sat back down and she said, "Calvin, I need you to understand something. What you're describing is the early stages of a coordinated effort to gain control of an elderly person's assets through a power of attorney secured under false medical pretenses. That's not a family squabble. That is a category of elder financial abuse that is criminal in this province." I asked her what my options were. She said, "You have more options than most people in your situation because you have resources they don't know about, and because you came to me before they made any moves. We can build you a fortress." So that's what we did. Over the next 9 days, I sat in her boardroom from morning until evening. We set up a numbered holding company in Ontario with me as the sole director, removed the $22 million from the RBC holding count into a structured arrangement across 3 Canadian banks, none of them anywhere near my son's neighborhood. We registered the 3 Thunder Bay properties to the holding company. I executed a new power of attorney naming Mrs. Tremblay's partner, a man named Mr. Beaudry, as my attorney for property and personal care, with strict instructions and a video recording of me explaining my reasoning, lucid, clear, on the record, to be used if anyone ever tried to challenge my capacity. I had a full cognitive assessment done by a geriatric specialist in Thunder Bay who declared me sharp as a tack. I got the paperwork notarized, sealed, and copies placed with 3 separate firms. Then I made the move that changed everything. Hugh and Pamela's house on Edenbrook Drive was not, in fact, theirs free and clear. I'd known for years that Hugh had refinanced twice. What I didn't know, until Mrs. Batteritz Tremblay had her firm pull the title in the mortgage history, was that they were currently underwater on a private second mortgage they'd taken out 2 years ago to fund a renovation that never quite finished, and that the lender was a numbered company that was, in turn, owned by a holding company that was preparing to call the loan because Hugh and Pamela had missed 3 payments. They were 3 months from default, which meant they were 3 months from the house being seized and sold at a power of sale. I bought the loan through my numbered company for pennies on the dollar relative to what they owed. The paperwork went through on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Wednesday morning I owned the second mortgage on my son's house. And behind that, I had a clear path to title once they defaulted, which Mrs. Tremblay's mortgage specialist said would happen within 90 days at the latest, given their cash flow. I drove home on the Friday. I stopped at the Tim Hortons in Marathon, and I sat in the parking lot for half an hour with a black coffee, and I thought about whether I was being cruel. I thought about Marlene and what she would say. I thought about my granddaughters, Briar and Cassidy, and whether they had any idea what their mother was planning. I thought about Hugh, my boy, who had cried in my arms when his hamster died when he was 7, who had hugged me at his mother's grave so hard I thought my ribs would crack. The Hugh I knew would never have agreed to put me in a home, so either he had become someone else or he was being managed by someone else. I needed to know which. That was going to determine how this ended. When I pulled into the driveway on Edenbrook, Pamela was in the kitchen window. She waved. She actually waved. I waved back, and I went in through the side door, and I hung up my coat, and I came into the kitchen, and I gave my son a hug, and I told them my friend Wendell had passed peacefully, and I'd helped his daughter sort through some things. Pamela said all the right words. Hugh asked if I was okay. I said I was tired, and I was going to bed early. I started to act, not for the camera, but with my eyes open. I let Pamela see me put my keys in the fruit bowl, and then asked 20 minutes later where my keys were. I let her see me forget that we'd already had breakfast. I let her find me standing in the basement laundry room one afternoon looking confused, and when she asked me what I was doing down there, I said I'd come down to get something, but I couldn't quite remember what. I watched her face. I watched the small, tight smile that came and went. I watched her reach for her phone the second she thought I turned away. She was documenting every confused moment, building her case. I did this for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of sleeping in that drafty sunroom in a sleeping bag rated for -10 because the space heater wasn't enough. 6 weeks of eating leftovers Pamela left out for me with passive-aggressive notes. 6 weeks of being talked over at dinner and ignored when the granddaughters came home. 6 weeks of hearing Pamela on the phone with her sister calling me a burden and a parasite and an old fool. And the whole time, at night, after they went to bed, I went down to the laundry room where I'd hidden a small recorder I'd bought in Thunder Bay, and I transcribed what I'd heard that day into a notebook Mrs. Tremblay had given me. Dates. Times. Direct quotes. Names of doctors mentioned. Every time Pamela said the words Maplewood Glen or power of attorney or memory care, I wrote it down. I also got to know my son again when Pamela wasn't around. Hugh worked from home Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Thursdays, Pamela went to her Pilates class and her standing lunch with her sister, which meant Hugh and I had 3 hours alone in the house. He'd come into the kitchen and make us both coffee, and we'd sit at the island, and I'd ask him about his work. The first few Thursdays he was distant. By the 4th Thursday he started talking to me. Really talking. He told me his marriage was hard. He told me Pamela had changed since she'd made partner at her firm. That money had become a different kind of thing for her. That the new build in Oakville was her dream, not his. And that he'd been pulled along behind it for 2 years. He told me he'd lost 2 friends because Pamela didn't like their wives. He told me he didn't know how to push back anymore. And one Thursday in early November, he looked at me across the kitchen island and he said, "Dad, I'm sorry I haven't been around for you. I'm sorry the sunroom is cold. I keep meaning to put proper insulation in there and I never do. I'm tired all the time." I wanted to tell him. God, I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, "Son, your wife is planning to commit you to elder abuse. Do you know that? Do you understand what she's doing?" But I didn't, because I didn't trust him yet. I didn't know if Pamela had him fully, or if there was still some of my boy left underneath. So I just put my hand on his arm, and I said, "Hugh, when you have something hard to tell me, you tell me. I'm your father. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me for a long second, and his eyes got wet, and he nodded, and then Pamela came home early, and the moment closed up like a fist. The default on the second mortgage came through in mid-December. Mrs. Tremblay's specialist called me on a Tuesday to confirm the clock started ticking on the power of sale process. By the end of January, my numbered company would have legal title to the house at Edenbrook Drive. Pamela accelerated her timeline at the same time. She started leaving brochures for Maplewood Glen on the kitchen counter, supposedly by accident. She arranged for me to have an appointment with Dr. Whelan, who was their family doctor, not mine, for what she called a wellness check. She made the appointment without telling me. I found out about it because Hugh mentioned it offhand at dinner. I went to the appointment. I let Dr. Whelan ask me questions. I answered them all correctly because I'd had my own assessment in Thunder Bay, and I knew my baseline. He was a young man, harried, distracted. He wrote nothing concerning in his notes. Pamela had clearly hoped for more. 2 days before Christmas, she made her move at the dinner table. She'd cooked a roast. She'd opened a bottle of wine. She'd arranged a folder of papers on the sideboard. After the plates were cleared, she said, "Calvin, Hugh and I have been talking, and we want to make sure you're protected as you get older. We've been thinking about the future. Just some paperwork to make sure that if anything happens, we can take care of you the way you'd want." She slid the folder across the table. Power of attorney for property. Power of attorney for personal care. Both naming Pamela as the primary attorney, with Hugh as backup. She'd had her own lawyer draft them. She'd had already signed where the witness lines were. She handed me a pen. I looked at the pen. I looked at Hugh, who was looking at his plate. I looked at my granddaughters, who were on their phones at the other end of the table, oblivious. I looked at Pamela. She was watching me with that small, tight smile. I said, "Pamela, this is a kind thought. I'd like to read it over, take it to my own lawyer, just to make sure I understand everything." She said, "Of course. But let's not drag it out. The longer these things sit, the more confusing they get. Why don't you just sign the property one tonight and we can do the medical one after the holidays?" I smiled at her and I said, "I think I'd rather have a fresh head on it. Let me sleep on it." She said, "Calvin, this is for your protection." I said, "I know, dear." "Thank you." And I picked up the folder and I took it to the sunroom with me, and I did not sign anything. That night I called Mrs. Tremblay. I told her it was time. We set the date for January 8th. Christmas came and went. I gave Briar and Cassidy each a card with $500 in it, money I could afford now without thinking, and they barely looked up from their phones to thank me. Pamela served prime rib. Hugh drank too much wine and went to bed at 9. I sat in the sunroom in my coat, and I called Stuart, my coffee friend, and I told him for the first time what was happening. He cried on the phone. He said, "Calvin, you come stay with me. I have a spare room. You don't deserve this." I told him I had a plan and I'd tell him after the new year. January 8th was a Wednesday. Mrs. Tremblay flew down from Thunder Bay. Mr. Beaudry came with her. We met at a law office in downtown Toronto, and we drove out to Mississauga together in Mrs. Tremblay's rental. Hugh's truck was in the driveway. Pamela's Lexus was in the driveway. They were both home, working. Briar was at her boyfriend's. Cassidy was at school. I let Mrs. Tremblay and Mr. Beaudry in through the front door. Pamela came out of her office with her phone in her hand, and the color drained out of her face when she saw two strangers in suits standing in her foyer. Hugh came down the stairs a moment later. I asked them both to please come into the kitchen. We had something important to discuss. Pamela said, "Calvin, what is this?" I said, "This is my lawyer, Mrs. Tremblay. This is my attorney for property, Mr. Beaudry. We need to sit down." We sat. Mrs. Tremblay slid a folder across the kitchen island. Pamela opened it. The first document was the deed of sale. The second mortgage on the house at Edenbrook Drive had been called. Power of sale had been initiated in December. The numbered company that owned the second mortgage had completed the process. Title to the property now rested with the numbered company. Pamela's hands were shaking. Hugh looked like he'd been hit in the face with a frying pan. Mrs. Tremblay said, "The numbered company is solely owned by Mr. Calvin. He is the legal owner of this house as of 3 days ago." Pamela said, "This is a mistake." Mrs. Tremblay said, "It's not a mistake. The mortgage was in default for over 90 days. You missed 3 payments to the original lender. The lender sold the loan. The new owner pursued power of sale. You will find all the documentation in the second folder." Pamela opened the second folder. She started flipping pages faster and faster. Then she stopped. She looked up at me. She said, "Calvin, you did this." I said, "Yes, Pamela, I did." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because 7 weeks ago I came home from my brother's funeral, and I stood in the mudroom, and I heard you tell my son that I was a parasite, and you were going to have me declared incompetent, so you could put me in Maplewood Glen and turn my room into your office. You were going to forge a medical opinion. You were going to use a power of attorney you'd had drafted without my consent, and you were going to do it before the end of January." Hugh stood up so fast his chair fell over. He said, "Pamela." "What is he talking about?" She didn't answer him. She was looking at me. I said, "I have it on tape, Pamela. 6 weeks of tape. I have notes. I have the brochures you left out. I have the appointment you made with Dr. Whelan that I didn't ask for. I have the power of attorney forms you tried to make me sign on December 23rd. Mrs. Langsive, Tremblay has all of it. If I want to, I can take this to the police, and they will look at it as a coordinated attempt at elder abuse and fraud, and you will lose your law license and your partnership and possibly your freedom. Do you understand me? She started to cry. Not real crying, the other kind. Hugh said, "Pamela, what did you do?" I said, "Hugh, sit down, please. I want to talk to you." He sat. He was crying too, but his was real. I said, "Son, you have until the end of February to vacate this property. I am not going to take it from you in a way that hurts you. I am going to give you a fair settlement to help you find a new place. Not what Pamela had planned for the Oakville house, but enough. The girls can finish their school year here. After that, you and Pamela are going to make some decisions about what you want your life to look like, about who you want to be. I am not going to make those decisions for you, but I am telling you right now, in this kitchen, that I am done being treated like furniture in a house where I was promised I'd be family." Pamela said, "Calvin, please. We can talk about this." I said, "Pamela, I am not finished. There are some things I want you to know. Edmund left me $22 million, 3 farms, a house on Lake Superior. I came home from the funeral planning to give half of it to my son. I had decided that on the drive. Half, $11 million, and a property of his choosing, because that's what fathers do for their sons. Now, because of what I heard in this kitchen, my son is going to get a fair severance from a house he was about to lose anyway, and the rest of what my brother spent his life building is going to a foundation I'm setting up next month. It will help elderly Canadians who are being financially abused by their own families get out of those situations and into safe housing. I am going to call it the Marlene Foundation, after his mother. After your mother-in-law, Pamela, who, by the way, told me before she died that you had a coldness in you." I did not believe her. I should have. Pamela was on her feet now. She was shouting that she'd see me in court. Mrs. Tremblay said, calmly, "You are welcome to retain counsel, but I would advise against it. The recordings alone would end your career." I left the room. I went to the sunroom and I packed the one suitcase I'd brought into this house 7 years ago, plus a small box of Marlene's letters I'd kept under the bed. That was all I owned. Mr. Beaudry helped me carry them to the car. Hugh came out as I was loading up. He was barefoot in the cold. He stood in the driveway and he said, "Dad, I didn't know it had gone that far. I swear to God, I didn't know." I looked at him, my boy. 46 years old, tall like his mother, tired eyes. I said, "Hugh, I think you knew some of it. I think you didn't want to know all of it. There's a difference, but the difference matters less than you think." He started to cry harder. He said, "What can I do?" I said, "You can decide who you want to be. Without her, or with her, but as yourself. And when you figured that out, you call me. I'll be at Stewart's for the rest of the winter. After that, I'm going up to the house on Lake Superior. There's a phone there. The number's at Stewart's. Call me when you have something to say that's yours." He nodded. He couldn't speak. I got in the Buick. Mrs. Tremblay and Mr. Beaudry followed me in their rental. We drove to Stewart's in Burlington, and Stewart had the spare room made up and a pot of stew on the stove. That was 4 months ago. I'm writing this from the kitchen of the log house on Lake Superior. The water is gray today. The ice is just coming off the cove. I had a contractor come up last month, and he insulated the place properly and put in a new propane furnace, and I'm warm for the first winter in 7 years. Hugh called me 3 weeks ago. He'd left Pamela. He'd moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Burlington. He wanted to know if he could come up and see me. I said yes. He drove up last weekend, and we sat on the dock, and we didn't talk much for the first hour. Then he started, and he kept going for a long time. He told me things about his marriage. I didn't need to know, but I let him say them anyway because he needed to. The girls are with Pamela. He sees them on weekends. Briar reached out to me on her own last month and apologized for how she treated me. Cassidy isn't ready yet. That's all right. I'm not going anywhere. The Marlene Foundation got incorporated in March. We've already helped 17 seniors in Ontario get out of abusive home situations and into safe housing. Mrs. Tremblay sits on the board, said a Stewart, who turned out to have a head for nonprofit governance I never would have guessed. I gave Hugh a job there last week, helping with intake. He's good at it. He's calm with the old folks. He listens. He's becoming his mother's son again, slowly. I don't know how many years I have left. My doctor in Thunder Bay says I'm in better shape than men 10 years younger. I think that's because I finally stopped sleeping in a cold sunroom and started eating real food again. I think it's also because I finally stopped pretending. I spent most of my life absorbing things, the way Marlene said. I'm done absorbing. I'm done being smaller than I am to make other people comfortable. If you've made it this far, and any part of this story sounded familiar, I want you to hear me. Your blood does not get to treat you like garbage just because they share your name. Love is not the same as access. Family is not the same as permission. And it is never, never too late to look at the people you've given everything to and say, no more. Now I'm going to go pour a coffee and watch the loons come back to the cove, because they're due any day now. And Edmund used to say there's no sound in the world like the first loon of spring. I sat on that dock with my son this past weekend, and I thought a long time about how a man ends up where I ended up. Not the money part. The other part. The part where I let myself be pushed into a cold sunroom for 7 years and called it gratitude. The part where I absorbed every small cruelty and convinced myself it was love. I want to tell you what I've come to understand. Sitting here on Lake Superior with the ice finally giving way. Nothing in my life happened by accident. My daughter-in-law Pamela did not become cold overnight. She got there one small permission at a time, mine included. Every Christmas, I let her talk over me. Every dinner, I let her treat me like furniture. Every winter, I let her keep the thermostat at 16 because she said it saved on hydro. I was teaching her exactly how little I was willing to defend. My boy Hugh learned the same lesson watching me. He learned that his father could be made smaller and would not push back. That is on me as much as it is on her. Cause and effect runs straight through a family the way roots run under a yard. You don't see it until something dies above ground. I think now about the 3 things my Marlene used to say a person needs to live a real life. She'd say a person needs character, a person needs sense, and a person needs grit. Character is what you do when the door is closed and nobody's keeping score. Sense is knowing the difference between what you wish were true and what is actually happening in front of your eyes. Grit is what carries you through the long stretch when neither of the other two is enough on its own. I had grit my whole working life. I'd convinced myself that's what I was showing in that sunroom too, but I wasn't. I was showing surrender dressed up as patience. There's a difference, and it took me 68 years to learn it. If you're listening to this, and any part of it sounds like your own kitchen, I want you to hear me clearly. You are allowed to see what you're seeing. You are allowed to act on it. Forgiveness is a gift you can offer once the truth is on the table, but not before, and never as a substitute for the truth. My son got my forgiveness because he was willing to look at himself. My daughter-in-law did not, because she wasn't. That isn't bitterness. That's just bookkeeping. The years I have left, I am going to spend awake. I am going to spend them watching the loons come back to this cove and pouring my own coffee in a kitchen that belongs to me. And I am going to spend them helping other folks like me, who gave their whole lives to people who stopped seeing them, find a way out of those cold sunrooms and into somewhere warm. That's not revenge. That's just a man finally understanding what he was put here to do.